Hello, wine and podcast fans. In less than a week, hundreds of winemakers and winery owners will be descending upon San Francisco. On this podcast, you'll hear from a handful of people who will be in attendance. Follow me on the Wine Road. Each year, Wine and Spirits magazine releases their top 100 wines of the world. To honor those chosen, they all gather to participate in the Top 100 tasting event. This year on Tuesday, October 9th. Yep, it's coming up in less than a week. I had the good fortune of being invited again, and if you listen through this podcast, you too might be inspired to attend, if you're close enough and have the time to do so. On today's podcast, I'll be talking with a handful of those who were invited to attend from Northern California. These are all from past interviews, but you'll get an idea of who they are and what they craft. You'll hear from Jason Drew of Drew Family Wines, from Jared Brandt of Donkey and Goat, an urban winery in Berkeley, Eric Sussman of Radio Coteau in Sonoma County, and Cathy Corison of Corison Winery, and Jean-Charles Boisset of Raymond Vineyards in Napa Valley. I'll also talk with Wine and Spirit magazine's publisher and senior editor, Joshua Green. I'll start off with a small producer who's been chosen for at least 7 years now. That's quite an accomplishment for Jason Drew and his wife Molly, who run the small family winery in Mendocino County's Anderson Valley. Jason told me when he decided on winemaking as a career, he wanted to take a different path instead of an education at UC Davis, Cal Poly, or possibly Oregon. So he chose the University of Adelaide in South Australia.
You know, at that time I was also quite fond of Shiraz, I should say. And so that was a little more of a compelling factor for me. And as we got closer to looking into it, I thought it would also be not only a really good school to learn the principles and practices and theory, but also an adventure for us. And so my lifelong partner and business partner and wife, we decided to head on over there right after we got married in 96.
That was my next question. How did she feel about that?
You know, it was... It took a little bit of convincing, but I think we were still young, and I'd like to think that we are still young now. But we're both pretty gung ho, and we were ready for an adventure and to learn for me, certainly to learn viticulture in another country was kind of like an added bonus for me. I knew I could always come back and learn what I needed to learn in viticulture in California, off the California coast, and I was planning on doing that. In fact, I have done that. And so, it wasn't too tough. But
and you came home with an education and a child, from what I understand.
And a child, that's right. I think that was one of the negotiating terms that we had in place, where she certainly wanted to have a child. I did too. And the timing was right, and so... we said, what the heck, we'll have a kid out there at the same time, which was incidentally kind of brutal because the birth date came right at the same time that I was taking my finals. And so that was a little bit tricky, but made it through. And now he's part citizen of Australia, dual citizenship now. So he's happy about that.
So you've worked at quite a few wineries after you got back, had some good education, and then finally found a vineyard and started your own thing.
That's right. It was in 2004 when we decided to travel up to the North Coast and explore and see what kind of land offerings there were to be had. And we hadn't really confined ourselves to any particular area, but we wanted to be on the coast, and we were familiar with this area up here. And just the intrigue and the geology was so fascinating, and the potential for world-class Pinot Noir was on the rise, and it seemed like an exciting place to be. And we happened to find a spot that just seemed very familiar to Molly, which was quite interesting. And it was the first place we looked at, 26 acres on the Mendocino Ridge Appellation, 3 miles from the coast and 1,250 feet up in elevation. It was an existing organic dry farmed apple orchard with heirloom varieties there, and we thought, let's just go for it. And so the rest is history.
You said that you're the farthest west, or the closest to the coast, at least in this appellation.
That's right. And I should preface it by saying that that's at least to the best of my knowledge, we are the closest vineyard to the coast than any other in Mendocino County.
For Drew Family Wines, Jason continues to focus on Pinot Noir and Syrah, or possibly in his mind, Shiraz. But cool climate wines, they're elegantly restrained. He uses light filtering so the components left behind add a certain flavor profile. His current vintages are 2015, so he does age them for a while in barrel and bottle. Find them at drewwines.com. Another guy who doesn't filter much at all is Jared Brandt of Donkey and Goat Winery in Berkeley. They prefer to make natural wines and a natural sparkling wine, which is referred to as Pet Nat, short for Pétillant Naturel. That's the wine that first caught my attention when I saw him at a seminar on Pet Nat at last year's Wine Expo. One thing Jared likes to experiment with is the vessels he uses to ferment and age the wine. Aside from wood and stainless steel, he's fond of concrete and terracotta, which is sort of like going back to the original way early winemakers held and carried their wine.
Exactly. We really like, concrete's gained a lot in popularity. I'm not totally in love with concrete because you can't sterilize it with steam, and that's what we use to sterilize vessels. We don't want to use any chemicals, and as a result, I always worry that the previous wine's going to have an imprint of the next wine we ferment in there. We really enjoy wood. We use a lot of wood fermentation vessels, and then we do use concrete and terracotta. I do think the larger formats, they're gaining popularity again. You know, Robert Mondavi, when he built his winery originally, and he had all fancy stainless steel tanks, and in the late 80s or early 90s, he switched back to wood. Wood has some really nice properties for fermentation. It breathes a little, so it rounds out your acids. Also, it insulates. Unlike stainless steel, it provides some natural insulation, so it'll take you a little longer to gain temperature, and then it'll hold temperature a little nicer. And it's a really nice product to work with. When it's empty, it's very hard to maintain, which is, I think, part of the reason it fell out of popularity.
What are you finding that you notice that's different about the terracotta? What do you like about that?
So it's a new experiment for us. We were hoping to have 2 vessels this year. Sadly, one broke. And
there's one problem with that, isn't it?
Theoretically, you can steam them. One we steamed with no problem. The second one we steamed and it split in half. We have a new one being made right now in Florence, Italy for us. The terracotta is really, really interesting texturally, is what I'm finding more than anything else. That the wines have a little bit more body, and almost like a lot of commercial wineries will add, or more commercial wineries will add gum arabic to give their wines a kind of a thicker texture. It's very typical, actually. It's an additive, and I think the terracotta is kind of providing that in its own natural way.
Isn't it interesting with all the advancements in winemaking, and in many ways we're going back to traditional methods?
Yeah, I love old textbooks, and I have a winemaking textbook from like the late 1800s, and our winemaking process and what's listed in the textbook are almost identical. Wow. I mean, it's not... And I'm a fan of technology. I find it for the wine, it doesn't necessarily add what I'm looking for.
And I've also heard that it's not unusual for you to rely on the traditional foot stomping when you need a little bit more juice.
Yes, we have a very gentle destemmer, and when we need more juice, and actually sometimes before we put wine in the press, we'll foot stomp it as well. The foot is has a great ability to break up berries without breaking seeds, which is actually pretty difficult to do perfectly on a mechanical destemmer and crusher. So we love feet, and we have people who end up loving to jump up and down on grapes for an hour or two.
Sure. Your wines are unfined and unfiltered, too, and that can lead to a cloudy wine. Talking about modern technology and methods, sommeliers are taught to look for clarity in wine. But it doesn't bother me to see a cloudy wine. Like, I'm a big fan of natural apple juice, which is always a thicker, cloudy juice. So why not for wine?
So for us, we don't actually always make unfined or unfiltered wines. Occasionally we'll have a wine that has some technical problem with it that we believe that filtering is the right solution for. But we think the wine should be as specific to the place they're from as possible. And finding, which is mainly what you do for clarity, you'll add something like a fish bladder that's been dried and ground up, or bentonite, which is the same product that kitty litter is made from. But in either case, while they're removing the particles that are making it cloudy, I also think they remove a little bit of the flavors, and I'm just not as interested in them. As we've gotten better as winemakers, we've learned we don't do a lot of racking. Like, we'll mainly only rack, so only take the wine out of barrel. when we bottle, but we've gotten a lot more careful about it, which you can get a little bit more clarity just by doing that. We never say that we try to make crystal clear wines, and particularly like our sparkling wines, we disgorge by hand, and we just don't care that there's some leftover lees in them.
As you may or may not know, the lees is the sediment that settles on the bottom of the barrel or the vessel as the wine sits. Many winemakers stir up the lees in wine as it ages to round out the mouthfeel, soften, and add a creaminess to it. In natural wines, you'll often see the lees at the bottom or floating in the bottle. He's Jared Brandt of Donkey and Goat, an urban winery in Berkeley. Since they make natural wines, it's important to them to source their grapes from vineyards who utilize natural farming practices.
Yes. So we work with vineyards like Philgreen Farms in Anderson Valley, which is it's actually a twofold interesting one vineyard for us. It's the land is owned by a biodynamic land trust, and it's farmed biodynamically. But even within people who are either organic or biodynamic, we look for really specific farming practices, and we typically buy by the acre so we can help dictate them. Within biodynamics, there's a lot of people who use a chemical called copper sulfate, and that's not something. Well, even though it's considered organic, it's not something that we like to have used. And so like Philgreen Farms doesn't use any sulfur in the vineyard, which works really well for us.
That was Jared Brandt of Donkey and Goat Winery in Berkeley. You can see their list of unique natural wines and their pet nat, single fermentation sparkling wine at donkeyandgoat.com. Now let's check in with Cathy Corison. I saw her at last year's event, and we met a few months later at her winery on the southern end of St. Helena. Cathy will be the first to admit she was very lucky. While still at UC Davis, she received an opportunity to work at Freemark Abbey, and just 8 months later, she took her first winemaking job at a now-defunct winery on Spring Mountain. Then, in 1980, it was off to the respected Chapelet Winery.
Which was already very well known for its Cabernets, up on Pritchard Hill, and I did all the 1980s there, all 10 vintages up there. So a very, very lucky duck.
Quite a jump to go from Freemark Abbey in the cellar to being a winemaker in your next position.
It was crazy, but there weren't enough little old white guys around. Yeah, so there were opportunities for a lot of us in those days.
That was partially due to the post-Paris tasting of 76. I imagine things just went really nuts after that.
I'd say it was largely due to that. Yeah, it was explosive.
As you were gaining your knowledge and expertise in the 70s and 80s, wines, particularly Cabernet Sauvignons, may have been more like what you're making now, not the bigger, fruitier, more alcoholic wines that became the trend in the 90s and 2000s.
Yes, I think fashion in wines comes and goes. So that's layered in on top of the fact that when I first got here, we were just learning about canopy management and learning how to grow better grapes. When I first got to the Napa Valley in the mid-70s, grape growing consisted of pruning and picking. So crops were much bigger in those days, and there was much less manipulation of the canopy. And so they did pick at lower sugars than many do today, but it's not the same as when I pick at lower sugars now. I'm picking fully ripe grapes with very moderate crop loads, packed with flavor and complexity. I think there was more vintage variation in those days. You could have a great vintage like 1970, where no matter what you did, it was truly a great vintage. But I think now we've leveled it out. I think we can make better wines year in and year out because of everything we've learned about growing grapes.
2011 is a fine example of that.
Perfect example. I pick early on early sites. Basically, these are gravel pits, these vineyards here on the benchland. So I was very lucky in 2011 that I could get Cabernet ripe, and I love my 11s. They were ripe at lower sugars, but they're beautiful wines. There were other places, through nobody's fault, that couldn't get Cabernet ripe. But here on the bench, yeah. And if we hadn't, I think 20 years before, we wouldn't have made as good wines in 11. We didn't know as much.
Right. When you were nearing your tenure at Chapelet, Did you already have in mind what you wanted to do, and you kind of saw, I'm going to do things a little differently, and I had this in mind, and so you were ready to move on?
It's not so much about doing things differently. Stylistically, I had a different notion. There was this wine inside of me that needed to get out, and it was not a mountain wine. And in fact, I made wine for 3 vintages for myself while I was still up there. It's crazy.
Right. Well, a lot of winemakers do that. You have the opportunity to use their services, their crush pads, and their equipment. It's an easier way to start your own business.
Well, and Don Chapelet was wonderful to work for. I was always grateful that he encouraged me to do that.
Well, you certainly have a favorite variety and place, Cabernet Sauvignon and the benchlands. And it is interesting, we were talking about this a little earlier, the difference between the grapes grown in the valley floor and the benchlands and the mountainside. And you certainly have a strong appreciation for the benchlands.
Well, I just love wine. But this wine that was fully formed in my head before I started making it was a benchland wine. I was looking to make Cabernet that was both powerful and elegant. Cabernet is going to be powerful. It doesn't matter how you grow it, how you pick it, what you do, it's going to be powerful. But for me, it's much more interesting at the intersection of elegance, and they almost sound like opposites, but they can be in the same glass at the same time. And that's what I've been chasing all my adult life.
Yeah, I like that term I saw on your website, and I've seen it around here, and you say it yourself, the term, the intersection between power and elegance. And that's as far as you like to go, is that intersection. But there are certainly others who pass through that intersection and keep going, don't they, in one direction or the other?
Yeah, that's, at some point, winemaking becomes art, and we all are expressing a different thing. To some extent, when wine is made by one person, it reflects the hand that made it.
And your wines are certainly artful. They're quite appealing and to the palate, like art is to the eye. And surprisingly, you've never reached over 14% in alcohol. Huh?
Nope. Any wine I've ever made has been under 14%, and I've never de-alcoholized a wine. Basically, I came to this little corner of the world because I knew it would make aromatic wines with velvety tannins and good natural acidity and lots of complexity, and that's the wine that was in my head. So that's why my vineyards are here. And I made wines from the benchland for a very long time before I owned any benchland vineyards.
And how fortunate for you to be able to purchase this vineyard, the Kronos Vineyard, and have a place to build your winery. And you refurbished the house that was on the property, and here you are. So that worked out very nicely.
Yet another series of miracles. Yeah. A very lucky duck.
Cathy Corison, the maker of powerful and elegant Cabernet Sauvignon. They age very well, too. There's a great article on that topic from Eric Asimov. If you Google Eric Asimov and Corison, Corison, you'll find a New York Times article from 2015. Let me warn you, after reading it, you'll want to rush right over to Napa Valley and try her Cabernet and other wines. And you can always learn more about Corison Winery at corison.com. In addition to the tasting event, Wine and Spirits Magazine's Winter Edition features the annual buying guide. That includes the 100 best wines of the year and the 100 best buys of the year. To celebrate the issue, Wine and Spirits holds their top 100 wines tasting event at the Metreon in San Francisco. And it is a wine lover's playground. But you have to go in with a plan because you can only taste so much. Joining me on the phone to talk about the event is the New York publisher and editor, Joshua Green. Joshua, thanks for joining me again.
Good to be here, Jeff.
I always find the winter issue one of the most interesting issues you release.
Well, it's a lot of tasting and writing that goes into it. We tasted over 15,000 wines to select those 100 wineries and 100 best wines, and it's a huge undertaking for the year, and it's really a huge relief when it's all put together and sent out to people.
Right. And then you immediately start on the next 15,000.
Exactly.
Yeah, I've been very proud to be a part of that and be one of your tasters. So I see how much you go through, but it's still to wrap your head around 15,000. And you have 2 locations. You have New York and San Francisco, but it's just hard to imagine that many wines going through your offices.
Logistically, it's a big undertaking because as opposed to a lot of the other services that offer wine recommendations, we only recommend the wines that we've tasted blind in our offices. So processing all that wine, bringing panels together, having the panels either, vet the wine, say either yes, we would recommend this wine as a majority of the panelists, or no, we would not. And then a critic for that particular region would always go and taste those wines. If the critic weren't running the panel himself or herself, would taste the wines that the panel had recommended. So it's a very involved process, and we think it gives us some really interesting results and also helps us discover new things that other people might not be seeing it because it's all blind.
Right, yeah, all blind, and like you say, there's multiple layers of getting to that final. And what is it out of 15,000? Is it like 1,400 that ultimately make the cut for the issue?
Oh, I think that, normally we recommend anywhere between 20 and 30% of the wines that we taste, but then the issue, when we print an issue, we only include wines that we find to be exceptional for some reason, either qualitatively or because the price is inexpensive for the quality. So we print best buys in the issue, and we print wines that score 90 or better in the issue, and it varies radically from one issue to another as to how many wines we're going to have in an issue, but it's substantial. When we publish an issue, we publish a lot of recommendations in it.
Right, and I've said numerous times that Wine and Spirits magazine, any issue, is a great resource for discovering new wines, but this Top 100 Wineries issue, it really showcases what's being produced and respected in the U.S. and around the globe, and it's fun to read.
Yeah, well, there are 35 wineries that made it from the U.S., California, Oregon, Washington, and New York State. And then there are 65 wineries from every corner of the world, whether it's South Africa or New Zealand. It really covers a lot of ground. And, we put together this event from the tastings and from the issue, and all these top 100 wineries come and pour at the event. And that's an amazing opportunity for people to get to taste some really, really great wine. It is
fantastic, and I love it. And you certainly taste so many varietals that are unique to us here in California and even New York, like the Caño from Spain, Ribula from Slovenia, Zinamavro from Greece.
Some great Zinamavro from Greece, yeah. There's a lot of wine that people will know. There's some amazing California Cabernets, whether they be from Ridge or from Diamond Creek or from Inglenook. They'll all be there pouring. And then and so those are pretty well-known wines. And then, as you say, Chiariani, I don't know how many people have tasted Chiariani wines, and there's Zinamavros, but that's an opportunity to taste a really amazing, delicate wine that we're calling it sort of Pinot family or Pinot cousins, because we have wines from Bairrada that would be made from Baga, from Badio, and those are kind of a Pinot cousin, and then Nebbiolo is kind of a Pinot cousin, but we're putting that right after the Pinot cousins, and then Zinamavro is kind of a Pinot cousin because it has the same kind of delicacy and intensity that you can get out of great Pinot Noir.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an interesting. We arrange all the wines we create a navigation for people so that they can taste wines that are part of the same family of grapes or family of style, and it gives you an opportunity to really find some things that you may not have known about.
And obviously there's a lot of ultra-premium and luxury wines, but there's still a number that are reasonably priced, like Skinner and Green and Red and Ridge, as you mentioned. They have wines that are $30, and Ravenswood has their old vines in for only $18, and you'll find those there as well.
Yeah. I mean, there's a big mix, and I think it goes everywhere from, I think some of the most expensive wines there would be Penfolds, their Grange and Vega Sicilia, their Unico, and then you'll find some Muscadet, some Albariños and things that are less expensive but really delicious.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of Rieslings that are beautiful. So it's a wide range, and some people focus on the bigger, richer reds. Some people focus on the champagnes. Some people focus on the lighter, crisper whites. It's really an opportunity to taste a lot of champagne and drink and eat a lot of oysters if you like.
And he's not kidding. The oysters and sparkling wine are very popular. If you're finding yourself inspired to attend, visit wineandspiritmagazine.com. That's with "and" spelled out. And click on the Top 100 link. Tickets are $125, but considering these are wines from across the globe, you can't beat the price. Some of San Francisco's top restaurants will be providing delicious culinary treats throughout the evening as well, so that price covers your food for the evening too. It's also a fundraiser. Proceeds benefit Baykeeper that use science and clean water laws to improve the bay's ecosystem. It's one heck of an evening. Thanks to Joshua for joining me on the phone. My next guest spent quite a few years in France developing his skills, which he's been applying artfully to his winery, Radio Coteau. Eric Sussman keeps busy crafting his style of wine and worked with as many as 16 different vineyards at one time. He's dwindled that down to about 6 now. They're all cool climate vineyards in West Sonoma County and Mendocino's Anderson Valley. This will be Eric's 4th year at the Top 100 tasting event. He has a non-interventionist approach in the cellar, so the end result has a greater representation of the attributes of the vineyards, which means he chose his vineyards carefully. When he has good grapes, that provides great wine.
Yeah, and we focus on the raw materials and really try to embrace the natural process of wine growing. The Burgundians have this saying, the hardest thing to do is nothing at all, and it's when you have really great raw materials, the fermentation kind of runs its course, and there's no additions, no manipulations, and at the end of the day, that wine is a real true and pure expression of place and time, and that's what we embrace here at Radio Coteau.
And you prefer organic vineyards or biodynamic?
Yeah, once again, both in the cellar and in the vineyard, we're believers in organic and biodynamic farming and non-interventional winemaking. Farming, it takes a lot of inputs and efforts, but being gentle on the earth and not only for the sake of the earth, but also the folks working in the field is really important to us. So we really want to have a healthy environment both in the vineyard and in the cellar, and we feel that translates to the wine's personality.
Tell us how you came up with the name Radio Coteau.
Yeah, I spent a couple years in France, and this was back in 95 and 96. And while living and working in France, I was in this school in Burgundy, and a friend of mine who is French and is from the Rhone Valley. His name is Fabien Bergeron, and he had this expression, Radio Coteau, which it loosely translates to word of mouth. Radio in French means to broadcast, and a coteau is a hillside. But the literal translation, this broadcasting of the hillside, is, our raison d'etre. It's kind of who we are in terms of having this sense of place, and the wines that are kind of, broadcasting this sense of place, and that's the kind of the essence of the meaning.
Should we venture up to a hillside and scream, drink Radio Coteau?
That's a good idea. Yeah, we could try that.
You get quite an education early on in viticulture, starting with viticulture, and then that led you into winemaking. Tell us a little bit about all the different places you had a chance to work.
Yeah, I grew up in New York and wasn't really raised around wine, but went to school up at Cornell and was in the ag school and started to learn about wine and viticulture and studied organic viticulture in upstate New York. And after leaving Cornell, I went out to the Yakima Valley in eastern Washington and worked there for 4 years and learned about winemaking and also organic farming in eastern Washington, and then went to France for a couple of years. And 95 I was in Bordeaux, did some apprenticeships at Mouton Rothschild and Claire Milon, and then moved over to Burgundy in 96 and was mainly situated at Cantarmont and Pomar, and also did some time at Jacques Prieur and Meursault. Then coming back to the States in 1997, I spent a year at Bonnet Dune, which was a pretty dynamic experience, and then moved up to Sebastopol in 98 and spent 4 years at Dalinger Winery, and really got situated in Sebastopol in western Sonoma County, and then in 2002 launched Radio Coteau.
Of all those places, what do you think you learned the most that you're still applying to this day?
Yeah, I often tell people that Radio Coteau is old world technique and new world fruit. So we embrace the old world techniques, this non-interventional winemaking approach, but it's the new world, and we're not Burgundy, we're Western Sonoma County, and that's what we really try to capture. So traditional winemaking practices with an appreciation for what the new world has to offer is kind of our focus.
I mentioned Wine and Spirits magazine earlier, and once again, you've landed on the top 100 list that they feel are the best wineries in the world. And that's not the first time, is it?
It's actually, it's the third time, 3 years in a row. It's a great honor, and we're grateful for the opportunity to be amongst this group of producers, and look forward to the tasting coming up in a couple weeks.
You must be proud, but does that give you a sense of validation, or do you even need that?
Oh, it all helps. It's the wine world isn't all romance. It's a lot of hard work, and so it's nice to get an accolade to keep us all going. We've got a really amazing team here at Radio Coteau, and it's a tribute to our staff as well.
Talking with you makes me think of the term "still rivers run deep." You're so calm on the exterior, but there must be a lot going on inside.
Yeah, no, it's important to be calm, and wine is a calming beverage, but it's also like I said, there's a lot of work that goes into making a fine bottle of wine, and but yeah, slow and steady. So.
Well, again, I know this is a very busy time, and regardless of you being calm right now, I know there's a lot of work to do yet. So I certainly appreciate you taking the time out to talk with me.
Well, thanks for coming out. I really appreciate you visiting with us.
That was my conversation with Eric Sussman of Radio Coteau from last year. This will be his 4th appearance at the Top 100 Tasting event. Learn more about Eric's style and unique vineyards he sources from at radiocoteau.com. That's radio, COTEAU.com. Heading back over to Napa Valley, another Top 100 winery as chosen by Wine and Spirits magazine is Raymond Vineyards. I should also point out their sister winery, Buena Vista Wines, was also chosen for the Top 100. Congrats to them as well. I sat down last year with owner Jean-Charles Boisset during Raymond Vineyards' 40th anniversary to talk about Raymond's history. Roy Raymond's work in the industry goes back to the end of Prohibition, and although Boisset Collection purchased Raymond Vineyards a few years ago, they work closely with the family.
For sure. Jeff, we love the Raymond. So we're very close with Walter, who's in mid-70s now. He lives in Arizona, but he comes to see us probably every quarter. The Raymond family works with us. Kirk Reed is our director of production, who is the husband of Chrissy Raymond. Chrissy makes her wine, at our winery as well. She makes 1,000 cases of a great wine. So we're very passionate about the family. In life, you could erase the past, or you could value the past and enhance the past. Mm-hmm. And we've chosen that path.
Yeah. Respectfully.
Thank you.
Who's the guy that started there? His first job was at Raymond many, many years ago, and he's still there to this day.
Yeah, Nuis de Pina, as well as his brother. And they both incredible. They come from Cape Verde, and they fell in love with Napa Valley and obviously the United States, and decided to stay 48 years ago. And Nuis, we celebrated his 40th anniversary at the winery last year. So he's into his 31st.
Yeah, oh, that's crazy. I'm sure you guys had quite a party for him.
We did. It was a great recognition. And, it's so powerful to be able to have someone within our walls who have built the actual winery. Very important. It's not only the person who scores the goals or who gets the scores, lead the winery like myself. It's more importantly the whole team who builds it every day. Right. You can have an idea. If you don't have a great foundation, it doesn't work. So we have, I believe, an amazing group. Victor in the Vineyards, who've been with us for over 5 years now, who was at Opus One before, who follows the organic and biodynamic philosophy. Stephanie Putnam, of course, who is an amazing director of winemaking. Cathy George, who's been with us for 27 years, who is in the winemaking team as well. So we really honor continuity. We feel it's important because it's not easy when you bring wineries into your world you want to move fast, you want to move into the direction you have in mind, and many people just fall off the train.
Yeah. Well, you move fast, that's for sure.
Well, we're here for a short period of time, so we'd better move fast.
You're trying to accomplish a lot in a short amount of time.
Well, it's essential, and we want to act quickly to do a lot of great things, so you could see them when we're still alive.
Right. And you can have a winery that'll last for hundreds of years, if not thousands, in the case of French wineries.
In the case of the French wineries, the investment we've made is enormous because we want to invest for the generations to come. Because every generation has to bring something, build something, and create something new in addition to respecting the previous one.
That's a fantastic thought. Congratulations on the 40th anniversary.
Thank you so much for recognizing it. And I was delighted, Jeff, when you said, well, let's meet and talk about it because, it's not us. It's the 40 years, the risk that the Raymond have taken. The beautiful 150-acre ranch in Rutherford and Santa Helena. They went to the banks, they borrowed, they made great wines, and they made it. It's not easy to do that in life. It's not easy to take risk. So we need to recognize that, and the wonderful leadership they've had in Rutherford. The appellation of Santa Helena and Rutherford is as well thanks to them in the 80s. So let's be recognizing that what they've done has been great for all of us.
The one thing I really appreciate about Jean-Charles Boisset is his respect for the past. Congratulations to Raymond Vineyards for their participation in Wine and Spirit Magazine's Top 100 Tasting Event. You can find out all the details at wineandspiritsmagazine.com, all spelled out. The list of the top 100 wineries won't be in print until the winter issue is released on or about October 9th, but you can find the list by clicking the Top 100 link on the website. The tab is at the top of the page. Consider attending the event on the 9th. It's really enjoyable to talk with wineries from around the world, and they certainly love telling their stories. I hope you enjoyed today's show. Remember, you can find my past interviews at onthewineroad.com, and other links are on Facebook. Also, please consider joining my wine community on Patreon, where I offer even more about the wine industry and some fun behind-the-scenes stuff. That's patreon.com/onthewineroad. Thanks for joining me today. I'll catch you next time. I'm Jeff Davis.